It's Enemy Sidelines, and my guest this week, Green Bay Packers team reporter Wes Hodkiewicz. Haven't talked to Wes in a minute, but good to be back out in training camp and covering preseason games. Wes, I know it's been a busy training camp for the Packers up there. How has it been for you personally covering the team?
Yeah, thanks, Deepi. It's been fun just to be able to be back out at practice again. The Packers have had now 12 open public practices, which as opposed to last year, not only were we not doing that yet, there were no fans involved. I mean, you didn't really have that same kind of energy. They're blaring music, trying to get people into it, but you can't replicate what it's like actually having that real energy inside Ray Nitschke Field where the Packers practice. And honestly, being able to, it was kind of a chaotic offseason. Obviously, there was the looming questions of Aaron Rodgers, but in the last 2 weeks, it's felt more like football again, and being able to just focus on not only the preparations of the 2021 team, but getting to see some of these young guys that, last year we really didn't know anything about them, even the draft class, because of the way the practices went and the focus that had to be on the veterans at that point. So it's been fun. It's been encouraging to get back to a little bit of normalcy this summer.
Well, you brought up the name that I think everyone just connects with the Packers in this training camp and this whole offseason. So let's start with Aaron Rodgers. Since he's been back, how is training camp gone? What's it been like just getting him back into the fold? I know he wasn't there the entire offseason, but how has the chemistry evolved with him and the receivers and the rest of the offense now that he's back?
Well, that's funny. What's interesting is I've been covering Rodgers for 10 years now, and he looks like he was here for the entire offseason program, every single practice. I mean, he came back sharp, and obviously, he's put a lot into his physical, trying to make sure that into his late 30s, he's in his physical prime. And you can tell that. And I think, some of the plays he's been able to make in practice, I mean, it's legendary at this point, what he's able to do with his arm talent, but just the way he's commanded this huddle and just stepping back into that spot, you can tell he's having fun again. And obviously there were some moves the Packers made right before camp, one of which was including the Texans and trading for Randall Cobb, a guy that he stood up for in his wedding. When Cobb came into Green Bay and was looking for a house here, he actually stayed with Rodgers. So you can tell that he's having fun with this group. And for everything that was going on the outside before camp, it really has felt a lot more like just business as usual now that he's back in the building.
All right. And what about Jordan Love? I know last season he didn't get to play in any preseason game, so that's obviously going to change this year. How does it affect his reps now that Aaron Rodgers is back? And what do you expect out of seeing him in the preseason?
Well, that's what's actually really something to follow, is because all the eyes were on Rodgers and what does that mean for Love? When in reality, the bigger thing was Love was the number 3 quarterback last year. Tim Boyle, who is the primary backup, he's in Detroit now. So regardless of Rodgers, obviously if Aaron wasn't here, Love would be getting basically all the reps, but Love's reps still have increased a lot going into that number 2 spot this year. And I really think he's been able to kind of, maximize that. There were some rough moments last summer because he was just getting basically the bottom of the barrel snaps. They actually created a developmental period at the end of practices to get him a 10-minute, kind of live period to get some reps. That wasn't the case this year. He was able to take all 9 weeks of the offseason program, probably took 90% of those reps. And now back in training camp has still been taking a good share of them when Rodgers isn't on the field. And I think you can tell that kind of the strides he's made in his game. He has a really live arm. You can see the NFL attributes there that made him a first-round pick, but it's also slowing down for him a little bit. The thing that's going to be really cool to follow in this game against the Texans is this will be the first time he's playing in a game since the Senior Bowl in January of 2020. He's a kid that's champing at the bit right now to really get back out there and show not only what he's learned, but how far he's come now in the last 20 months.
Well, we talk about Aaron Rodgers and how he affects Jordan Love's snaps, but what about Randall Cobb? Because I know it was quite a heated wide receiver group competition that's been happening over there in Packers camp. So with Cobb returning to the mix, what does that mean for some of the other receivers? Do the Packers keep more receivers? Does it mean that someone else is on the outs? How does that affect that battle? Well,
in my 10 years covering the team, the Packers have kept as few as 4 receivers on a 53-man roster and had as many as 7 at one point. So there is a lot of, this front office, Brian Gutekunst, who was, a guy that came up underneath Ted Thompson, the previous GM. They're pretty much sold on whoever the best guys are, we're going to keep them. I know that's kind of a cliche in the NFL, but it's really been true with the way Green Bay's developed the rosters. But to your point, this is as competitive of a group as really there has been in a number of years for Green Bay, because you have a 4-time Pro Bowler, now a first-time All-Pro, and Davante Adams, probably at the peak of his powers right now, leading that room. Marquez Valdez-Scantling came on really strong last year, not just a guy that can go deep on go routes and really challenge a defense, but became more of a complete receiver. 115 yards and a touchdown in that NFC Championship game really shined. Alan Lazard was a great free agent find for Green Bay 2 years ago. He's in the mix. And then Amari Rogers, who's actually a guy that, a third-round pick that Green Bay drafted back in the spring. Well, he's known Randall Cobb since he was basically 10 years old. His father, T. Martin, now the receivers coach with Baltimore, he coached Cobb at Kentucky, and that's how Amari was able to kind of learn from him. So you have 5 guys there that are basically not only probably locks for this roster, but are all going to be integrated in the offense. So you have Devin Funchess coming back off the COVID list last year. Jawan Rinfrey was a guy that really showed up really well, but he's been injured kind of lately. And Equinemius St. Brown and Malik Taylor were on the 53-man roster last year. So, yeah, this receiving core goes about 10 players deep, and trying to figure out who's going to be that 6th, maybe 7th receiver is really what these 3 preseason games are going to be all about.
All right, we've got a lot of familiar faces from the Packers here, and you and I were chatting about one just before this interview. James Camp, an offensive line coach, which a lot of Texans fans are really excited about what he brings to this O-line, because he's going to bring his whole vision and of how he wants to see this O-line work together, which has really been a position of struggle for the Texans in recent years. So what can you tell us about James Campy? What is his style of coaching, and what can Texans fans sort of expect from an O-line with him in charge?
Well, it's funny because Campy is a guy, he was an old school center, was the first guy that was Brett Favre's center in Green Bay. And, he looks like a gruff guy. He's a massive teddy bear. I don't want to give away any kind of secrets there, but he's literally one of my favorite human beings on the planet. I very much miss him. He also is an incredibly accomplished offensive line coach. If you look at the history of the Green Bay Packers O-lines, they're not a group that has invested first-round pick after first-round pick on the position. A lot of times it was Josh Sitton as a 4th-round pick becoming an all-pro left guard. I mean, it was Brian Bulaga. Yes, he was a first-round pick, but the way he developed into a 10-year starter in this league and is still doing it to this day with the Chargers. And obviously the biggest story of all for the Green Bay Packers is David Bakhtiari, a 5-time All-Pro, a former 4th-round pick, and a guy that very easily could be making a case at 29 years old to potentially be a gold jacket. Campy will never take credit for any of that, but the proof is in the pudding. And he's certainly, over his years in the NFL, the longest tenured Green Bay Packers assistant coach, still doing it at an incredibly high level. And certainly, I think someone that the Houston Texans and their fan base, when they look at their offensive line this year, they're going to know that group not only is well coached and they're going to give maximum effort, but also has a basis there and really a foundation when you look at the National Football League for what they're doing in their success.
All right, that's exciting news to hear. But both of these teams actually changed defensive coordinator since the last time they played as well. So tell me a little bit about the Packers' new defensive coordinator. How has the transition been for players? Has it been as different as it has been for the Texans? The Texans have gone from a 3-4 to a 4-3, but what sort of changes and what sort of transition has that defensive scheme been like for players?
Yeah. So under Joe Barry here, the Packers' new defensive coordinator, they are sticking with the 3-4 scheme. But as you know, I mean, there's so much variance now with that, with the sub packages in the National Football League. Now, it really is more about the overall idea, the scheme, the concepts, than it is just looking at the base defense. But that is still where they're going to be. The starting point is going to be. You're going to see Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith, a little bit of Rashawn Gary. They're your outside rushers up in a 2-point stance. They're going to move around a little bit. Really, the thing that I think Barry has brought the most so far is a lot of energy. Now, it's not to say that Mike Pettin didn't have that, but he just went about it a different way. Barry's your tried and true football coach. He's hopping, he's jumping. He told a story about in the defensive meeting room when the team came back for training camp, is trying to teach a left shoulder tackle. The guy just went and tackled air in the middle, in front of the team, all the way down to the ground. Mentioned he banged up his elbow while doing it. That resonates with these guys. And in the Green Bay Packers defense, it wasn't the change that they made wasn't because, okay, well, they're not good. We have to revitalize things. Packers had a top 10 defense last year, and they have a lot of playmakers. Jair Alexander, their 24-year-old cornerback, is pretty much on the precipice of becoming a perennial all-pro. I mean, he has that type of ability, and you're probably looking at him possibly moving around a little bit more this year in Barry's scheme. And realistically, DP, that what I'm looking for the most is what those defensive fronts look like this year for Green Bay. Barry comes from Los Angeles, the Rams. There was a lot of 5-man fronts, those Bronco type fronts with one inside backer. Curious if we're going to see more of that in Green Bay this year. They do have a really good Pro Bowl nose tackle in Kenny Clark, a really young base, and seeing how they use those pieces up front and where Barry decides to get creative is the thing that, while we may not see it on Saturday night when the regular season comes, I think is going to probably be the biggest difference from a year ago.
All right. Well, I can't believe preseason is already here, and it's only three games, but we'll take it. It's better than none, like in 2020. But, heading into this preseason, what are some of the other big storylines you're looking at for the Packers?
Yeah, for me, in the way that they've done this thing is there were two big changes. I mean, for a team that went to the NFC Championship game back-to-back seasons, they did change defensive coordinator. They also changed their special teams coordinator. And again, now with Mo Drayton taking over that unit, I think that's where you're going to probably see the most in the preseason, seeing, what their emphasis is there. They're going to have a new kickoff returner this year. They have Kylan Hill, a rookie 7th round pick, and Patrick Taylor competing for that spot. Amari Rogers, who I mentioned coming out of Clemson, in addition to being a 1,000-yard receiver last year for Clemson, they're hoping that he's the guy that helps spark their punt return units. That's been an area that's really kind of hampered Green Bay the last few years. So trying to put their best foot forward on special teams, I think that's going to be a big indicator, finding their core units there. And then honestly, just the overall depth of this team. They have a lot of various guys on the offensive line competing not only for spots on the 53, but for starting roles. The defense, there's been a big change there. They brought in Devonj Campbell from Arizona. He's now in that Christian Kirksey type will spot in the nickel, lining up next to second-year Mike linebacker in Chris Barnes, who was an undrafted rookie last year that ended up just kind of being a revelation for this defense. So the competition is pretty prevalent throughout the roster in seeing not only who makes that 53, but who kind of stakes their claim for a role on offense and defense. That's going to be the biggest test here, I think, for this team, in addition to obviously trying to stay healthy in these preseason games, making sure that you have the right pieces to fit a team that believes they can win a Super Bowl here in 2021.
All right. It's going to be a fun one to watch. I know it's just preseason to everyone else, but a lot of roster spots to be determined, a lot of competition everywhere. Wes, always appreciate it. Wes Hodkiewicz, team reporter for the Green Bay Packers. We'll catch up again soon. Thanks for the time, Wes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.